I cannot tell you the exact morning it happened. That is the thing about these kinds of changes. They do not arrive on a particular day with a particular time you can point to and say, "There. That is the moment." They creep in slowly, the way cold creeps into a room when the heating has been off for a while. You don't notice it while it's happening. You only notice when you are suddenly, undeniably, cold. What I can tell you is that there came a morning, an ordinary Tuesday morning in February, grey and quiet, when I stood at the doorway of my own kitchen and I hesitated. That was it. That was the thing. A hesitation. Half a second, perhaps less. My hand on the door frame, my feet on the threshold, and something inside me that had always moved freely through that doorway simply stopped. I had been walking into that kitchen every morning for 45 years. Before the children were awake, before George was up, before the day had properly begun. I would come downstairs in my dressing gown, my feet in their familiar slippers making their familiar sounds on the familiar stairs, and I would walk through that kitchen door and I would begin. The kettle, the tea, the first sounds of the morning, the quiet hiss of water heating, the small click of the kettle reaching temperature, the sound of a cup being set on the counter. Those sounds were my sounds. That kitchen was my kitchen. That morning ritual was as much a part of me as my own name. And on that Tuesday morning in February, I stood at the door and I hesitated, because inside, Nina was already there. She had rearranged the counter again. The kettle was in a new position. "Move to the left," she said, "for a better flow." My tea was in the back of the cupboard behind her herbal things. The fruit bowl where I always kept the bananas for my morning porridge had been replaced with a glass dish of chia seeds and granola sachets. It was still a kitchen. It was still the same four walls and the same window above the sink that I had looked out of every morning for 45 years, watching the garden come and go through the seasons. But it was not my kitchen anymore. And I stood at the door and I hesitated, and then I quietly turned around and went back upstairs and made tea with the small kettle I had moved to my bedroom 3 weeks earlier, when I had first begun to understand that my kitchen was no longer entirely mine. I sat on the edge of my bed with my cup and I looked at the window and I thought about George. I thought about every single morning we had made tea together in that kitchen, about the particular sound of his voice first thing, slightly rough, slightly slow, the way voices are before the day has warmed them up, about the way he always took the first sip of his tea and closed his eyes for a moment, as though he needed to receive it fully before he could begin the day. And I thought, George, what on earth is happening to our kitchen? Let me tell you the whole story. From the very beginning. From the kitchen where it all started. My name is Dorothy. Most people who have known me for any length of time call me Dot. I am 70 years old and I have lived in the same house for 45 of those years. which means that the house and I have become so thoroughly acquainted that I sometimes think it knows my moods before I do. The floorboard on the third step creaks a little more when I am carrying something heavy. The kitchen window sticks in damp weather. The garden gate makes a particular sound in a wind that I have stopped hearing because it has become part of the background music of my life. I grew up in a house where cooking was the primary language of love. My mother cooked the way some women talk. Constantly, expressively, with great attention to what was needed and who needed it. She did not say "I love you" very often in words. She said it in food. She said it in the soup she made when you were ill, in the cake she baked for your birthday without being asked. In a way, she always knew what you needed to eat and had it ready before you knew you needed it. I learned that language from her. Not formally. She never stood me beside her and taught me recipes as a lesson. But I absorbed it through years of being in the same kitchen with her, watching her hands, watching the way she moved among pots and bowls and spices with a fluency that I could not have named as a child, but which I understood completely as an adult. I married George when I was 25. He was 28. He was an electrician by trade and an optimist by nature. The kind of man who woke up every morning as though something good was probably about to happen. He was not a complicated man, George. He did not have depths that were hard to reach or edges that were difficult to navigate. He was exactly what he appeared to be: kind, steady, funny in a dry, quiet way, and completely devoted to his family. He loved my cooking. I say this not to boast, but because it is relevant to everything that follows. He loved it in the genuine, uncomplicated way that people love something that nourishes them. He would come into the kitchen when I was cooking and lift lids off pots and say, "What's that?" And I would tell him, and he would smell it and say, "Right. That's going to be good." And it usually was. We had 2 children. Robert came first, in 1980. Lena came 3 years later. They grew up in a house where the kitchen was always warm and always busy and always smelled of something. George used to say that you could tell what day of the week it was by what was cooking. Monday was the leftover soup, made from whatever the weekend had left behind. Friday was fish. Sunday was the roast. It was not rigid. I cooked many things on many days, but there was a rhythm to it, a pattern that became part of the texture of our family life. I made cakes for every birthday in our family, not just my own family. Neighbors, friends, the family down the road whose mother had passed and who had no one to make them birthday cakes. I made them for everyone who needed one. The recipe was my mother's, adjusted slightly over the years, but fundamentally hers. A plain sponge with buttercream and whichever decoration the birthday person asked for. Nothing elaborate. Just exactly right. George always said the cake was the best thing I made. Robert would say it was the stew. Lena would say it was the almond biscuits I made at Christmas. They argued about it the way siblings argue about things they love equally, which is to say without any real disagreement. just the pleasure of asserting a preference. My kitchen was the center of everything. The table in the kitchen, not the dining room table, but the smaller kitchen table, the round one with the slightly uneven leg that George had promised to fix for 15 years and never quite got to. That table was where everything happened. School projects and homework and George's newspaper and a cup of tea that was always waiting when someone came through the door. The kitchen was the room you came to first. Before the living room. Before anywhere else. You came through the front door and you turned right and you went to the kitchen. And whoever was there would look up and say, "Tea." When the children grew up and left, the kitchen became George and mine again. Just the two of us. The way it had been at the beginning. We had breakfast together every morning without exception. He had his toast with marmalade. I had my porridge with a sliced banana. We sat across from each other at that kitchen table and we talked about small things mostly. The daily small things that make up the substance of a life shared. What he had dreamed. What we needed from the shops. What the garden was doing. Small things. Those mornings were the best part of my day. I did not know that at the time. The way you often do not know the best parts of your day until you no longer have them. George died 22 months ago. A stroke. On a Thursday afternoon in April. He had been in the garden. He had been trying, for the 400th time, to fix the kitchen gate. And he simply fell. The doctors said he would not have felt much. I choose to believe them. The grief was, as grief always is, larger than I had imagined it would be despite having imagined it for years. George had been slightly unwell for a while, and you prepare yourself, or you try to. But preparation and reality are different countries, and the journey between them is one you make entirely alone. I went on. That is what you do. You go on, and the going on becomes its own kind of life, different from the life before but real in its own way. Lena called every day. Robert came every weekend. The kitchen was still mine, still the place I came to every morning and began from. And then, about 8 months after George died, Robert sat across from me at the kitchen table and he made a proposal. He said, "I've been talking." The house was too large for one person. Their flat was too small for a growing family. It made sense. Practically, financially, emotionally, for them to move in with me. He would be close by if I needed anything. The children would have more space, and I would not be alone. I looked at my son. He had George's hands and George's way of presenting things, methodically, with all the parts in order. I looked at him and I thought about the kitchen, about what it would mean to have other people in my kitchen, about whether I was ready for that. And then I thought about the mornings, about coming downstairs and turning right and finding that the kettle was already on and tea was being made and the kitchen was not empty anymore. And that thought, that small warm thought, decided it for me. I said yes. And they moved in. Oh, Nina is a good person. I want to say that at the beginning of this part, because everything that follows might make her sound otherwise, and that would not be fair or true. Nina is a good person who loves my son and is a devoted mother to my grandchildren and who means well in the particular, slightly relentless way of people who are always trying to improve things. That is the most accurate way I can describe her. She is always trying to improve things. In her own home, in the flat they had before they moved in with me. I imagine this quality expressed itself in 1,000 ways that work perfectly well. When you live in your own space, your own improvements improve your own things. No conflict. No displacement. Just a woman making her home work the way she wants it to work. But when you move into someone else's home, the improvements begin to land differently. They begin to land on things that belong to someone else. And those things, however ordinary they might look from the outside, are not just objects. They are a life. They are 45 years of a particular way of being in the world, expressed through the position of a kettle and the contents of a spice rack and the arrangement of a counter that has been arranged the same way since before Nina was born. The changes began within the first month. Small changes, the kind you cannot object to without seeming unreasonable. Nina reorganized the food cupboard. So we can actually see what we have, she said. The tins were rearranged. The spices moved. My herbs, which I kept in the small basket my daughter Lena had given me years ago, were moved from the counter to an upper shelf because they were taking up workspace. I said nothing. She replaced the old chopping boards. Mine, which were seasoned and worn in a way of things that have been used properly for years, with new ones, color-coded by food type. Better for hygiene, she said. She said it pleasantly, without any suggestion that the old ones had been unhygienic. But the old ones were gone, and the new ones, in their bright and unfamiliar colors, were what remained. I said nothing. She bought new pots. Her own pots, the kind with the thick bases and the glass lids, and she hung them on a rack she installed above the counter. My pots, George's and mine, the ones we had accumulated over 40 years of cooking, each one with its own history and its own particular weight in a hand. She put in the lower cupboard. To free up space, she said. You can still use them. Of course. I said nothing. I told myself it was reasonable. It was her home, too. Now, she needed to make it functional for her family. Change is part of sharing a space. I had agreed to share the space. I could not agree to share the space and then resist every change that sharing required. So I said nothing, and the changes continued. The food itself began to change. Nina was health-conscious in a way that I respect in principle and which is, objectively speaking, admirable. She read labels. She tracked things. Sugars and saturated fats and something called macros, which I had never heard of before she arrived and which apparently governs what a person ought to eat in a day. She cooked clean food, lean proteins and vegetables dressed with olive oil and grains that I had not grown up with and which filled a bowl in a way that was technically sufficient without ever quite being satisfying. The weekly food shop became hers. She was the one who drove to the supermarket and she was the one who made the list. And so what came home was what she had chosen. And what she chose did not include several things that I had bought without fail every week for decades. White bread. She bought a seeded loaf that was nutritionally superior but which tasted, to my honest tongue, like eating a health decision. Full-fat butter, replaced with this bread that was lighter but which did not behave in cooking the way butter behaves. Biscuits. The plain digestives I had with my afternoon tea every single day of my adult life. Gone. Replaced with something rice-based and virtuous. One afternoon, about 3 months in, I went to make my afternoon tea and I reached for the biscuit tin and it was not there. The tin. The round one with the Scottish Highlands on the lid that George had bought at a market fair some years ago was not on the counter where it always lived. I looked in the cupboards. I found it, eventually, on the high shelf above the fridge. Moved there because Nina had said that morning without looking up from her phone, "The counter looks cleaner without it." I got a chair. I climbed on the chair, carefully, because I am 70 years old and climbing on chairs is not what 70-year-old knees are designed for. And I retrieved my biscuit tin from the high shelf. And I stood in my kitchen holding my biscuit tin and I thought, I am standing on a chair to reach my own biscuits in my own kitchen. I did not say anything. I made my tea. I ate my biscuits at the kitchen table. I put the tin back on the counter where it belonged. The next day, it was back on the high shelf. That evening, Miriam came for tea. Miriam has been my friend for 30 years. She is honest in the way of long friendships. She will say what she sees without dressing up, and she will say it because she loves you and not because she wants to be right. We sat in the garden because the September evening was mild enough, and I made tea from my room kettle because I had started, to prefer that. I told her about the biscuit tin. Miriam looked at me for a moment. She said, "Dorothy, tell me all of it, from the beginning." So I told her. The spice basket, the chopping boards, the pots, the food, the biscuit tin on the high shelf, the way I had started timing my entries into the kitchen, coming in when Nina was not there, being quick about what I needed, retreating to my room rather than sitting at my own kitchen table because the kitchen no longer felt like a place I could simply be. Miriam listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, the way she is quiet when she is choosing her words. She said, When did you last cook a proper meal? Your meal? In your kitchen? I thought about it. I said, not since they moved in, she said. Nearly 4 months, I said. Yes, she said. Dorothy, you are the best cook I know. You have been cooking in that kitchen since before Robert could walk. You made food for half the street at one time or another. You made the cake for my David's 40th birthday. You made soup for my mother when she was ill. She leaned forward slightly. What is happening to you in there? I looked at my garden. The runner beans George had planted the spring before he died, still producing faithfully without him. The lavender along the back fence. The bird feeder that Robert had filled on the weekend. I said, I don't know quite how it happened. I stopped going in. Miriam said, you need to go back in. I said, I don't know how anymore. Without it feeling like an intrusion. Oh. And that, right there, was the truth of it. After nearly 45 years of walking freely into that kitchen, I had somehow arrived at a place where I felt like an intrusion in my own space. Oh. Miriam walked home that evening, and I sat in the garden a little longer, and I talked to George the way I had taken to talking to him since he died. In the quiet, one-sided way of someone who still has things to say to a person who is no longer there to hear them. I said, George, I cannot get into my own kitchen. What do I do with that? The garden was quiet. The bird feeder swung slightly in the evening air. The runner beans were still producing, faithful and indifferent to everything. And then, from somewhere I cannot name, something arrived. Not an answer, exactly. More like the beginning of one. Cora turned 9 in October. Cora is my granddaughter, Robert and Nina's eldest. She is a child of particular qualities that I have been cataloguing with great pleasure since the day she was born. She is serious and curious and asks questions that make you stop and think before answering. She is careful with things that matter to her. She keeps a notebook of things she wants to know more about, which currently includes deep-sea creatures, the reason bees make hexagons, and whether clouds are heavy or light. She is 9 years old and she is magnificent. She has been coming to my room in evenings since Robert and Nina moved in. Not every evening, but often. She will knock very formally, 3 small knocks, and wait for me to say come in. And then she will come in and sit on the small sofa by the window and tell me things. About school, about her friends, about things she has read or thought about or noticed. I listen. I ask questions. She answers carefully. This is our arrangement, and I value it more than I can say. One evening, about 2 weeks before her birthday, she came and knocked and came in and sat on the sofa, and she said, without preamble, because Cora is not a child for preambles, Grandma Dot, for my birthday, can you make me the cake? I looked at her. I said, your mother usually organizes the birthday things. My love, she said, I know, but I want your cake. The proper one. The one that tastes like birthdays. The one that tastes like birthdays. I sat with that for a moment. She said, Mum's cakes are fine, but they're not the birthday cake. You know, I did know. I knew exactly. There is the food that sustains, and there is the food that means something. And the birthday cake I had made for 30 years was not just a cake. It was a ritual. It was a language. It was a specific way our family said, You matter. This day matters. We are glad you are here. I said, I'll think about it. Sweetheart, she said. Okay. But can you think about it, yes? I said. Go to bed. She went to bed. And I sat and I thought about it. I thought about the kitchen. I thought about the last time I had stood at that counter and made something properly, with my own hands, for my own ingredients, in my own time. Months. It had been months. I thought about my mother, about the way she had moved through her kitchen, confidently, completely, as though the kitchen and she were in agreement about what was needed. I thought about the first time I had made the birthday cake by myself, without my mother guiding me. I was 30 years old, making it for Robert's first birthday, and I had been nervous and had telephoned my mother twice in the middle of it, and it had come out perfectly. And when George tasted it, he had said it was better than his own birthday cake had been, which was the greatest compliment he knew how to pay. That cake had marked every birthday in my family since. Robert's, Lena's, George's, then Cora's, then Sam's. 30 years of birthdays, announced by that particular smell filling the house and those particular layers rising in the oven and that particular moment when you take it out and it is golden and done and exactly right. Cora wanted that cake, and I was going to make it. The next morning, I went downstairs earlier than usual. Before Nina was up, before anyone was up, I stood at the kitchen door, and I did not hesitate. I opened it, and I walked in. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, and I looked around at it. All the changes, the new pots hanging in their rack, the color-coded chopping boards, the spice shelf where my herb basket used to sit, the tidy, efficient surfaces that no longer looked like mine. I stood and I looked at all of it, and then I opened the cupboard and I found what I needed. Some of my things were moved, but they were still there. Flour behind Nina's quinoa, sugar behind the protein powders, cocoa at the back of the highest shelf. I found the mixing bowl, my large ceramic one, which was still in its place because it was too heavy to move easily. I found my wooden spoon, in the drawer where it had always been. I set everything out on the counter. I began. The kitchen filled with the particular sounds and smells of a cake being made properly. Flour sifted. Butter worked. Eggs cracked one by one against the rim of the bowl. The smell of vanilla. Real vanilla. The small brown bottle I found at the very back of the spice shelf. Rising into the air. Oh. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Nina appeared in the doorway. She was in her dressing gown, her hair not yet done, clearly not expecting to find the kitchen occupied at 6:30 in the morning. She looked at me. She looked at the counter, the flour, the butter, the eggs, the mixing bowl. She said, "Dorothy." "What are you doing?" I said, making a start on Cora's birthday cake. A pause. She said, "Oh, I was going to order one from the bakery on the high street. They do beautiful ones." "I thought it would be easier," I said, still stirring. "It would be easier. But Cora asked me to make it." Another pause. She said, "I didn't know that," I said. "She asked me a few evenings ago." The pause this time was longer. I kept stirring. The batter was coming together the way it always came together. At first rough and separate, and then, with enough work, smooth and unified. Nina said, "Dorothy, can we talk properly?" I stopped stirring. I set down my wooden spoon. I turned to face her. She was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not her usual competent, moving forward expression. Something more uncertain, more open. I said, "Sit down." Then, we sat at the kitchen table. The round one with the uneven leg. George's table. The one he never fixed. The one I had never fixed either, because by the time I thought of it I had already decided I liked the slide rocket made when you leaned on it. It was distinctive. It was ours. I had not sat at this table with any ease or comfort since Nina moved in. I had eaten at it occasionally, but always quickly, always with the awareness of being in someone else's rhythm. Now I sat at it the way I used to sit at it, with my full weight, with no intention of being anywhere else. Nina wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. She said, "I don't quite know how to start this," I said. "Start at the beginning. That usually works." She almost smiled. Then she said, "I think I've been doing this wrong." I waited. She said, "Moving in here. The way I've been managing things. The kitchen especially." She looked at the counter, at my mixing bowl, my ingredients, the flour that was already beginning to settle on the surface like a light snowfall. I had a plan for how this would work. In my head I had a whole plan, and the plan made complete sense to me, and I went ahead with it, without thinking enough about what the plan was overriding. I said, "Tell me about the plan." She said, "I wanted things to run properly, healthily, efficiently. I wanted the children to eat well. I wanted the household to run on a schedule that worked for everyone. I had it all mapped out. She stopped, and I think what I didn't do, what I didn't even think to do, was ask what was already here, what was already working, what had been working for 40 years before I arrived. I said, "The kitchen," she said. "Not just the kitchen. What you do. What you know how to do." She looked at her coffee. "I moved your things to different cupboards, and I bought new equipment, and I changed the food, and I reorganized everything. And I told myself I was making it better." She paused. "But better for who?" I did not answer. I let the question sit. She said, "Court asked me last week if Grandma Dot used to bake more. Before we moved in." She looked up. She said she remembered the smell of the house when she used to visit. Before. And she wanted to know why it didn't smell like that anymore. I was quiet for a moment. Nina said. I didn't have an answer for her. I said, "What did you tell her?" She said, "I told her things were different now." And she looked at me the way she looks at people when she thinks they have given her an insufficient answer. A small breath of something like laughter. "Which is very specifically how she looks," I said. "She is very precise about insufficient answers," Nina said. "She gets that from someone." I looked at my mixing bowl on the counter. The batter sitting in it, waiting to be continued. I said, "Nina, can I tell you something about that kitchen?" She said, "Please." I said, "I started cooking in this kitchen when Robert was a baby. He used to sit in his bouncy chair on the floor while I cooked. He would watch me the way babies watch things they find interesting. Very seriously, like he was memorizing it." I paused. Lena would come and stand beside me on a little stool and hand me things. She wanted to be involved in everything. She still does. I looked at the counter. George would come in every evening when he got home from work, and he would stand behind me and look over my shoulder at whatever was on the stove and say, "Smells good," every single evening. For over 40 years. "Smells good." Nina was very still. I said, "This kitchen is where I have said the most important things I have ever said to the people I love. Not in words. In food. In the way I know that Robert likes his soup thick and Lena likes it clear. In the way I know that George needed something hot on a cold day and something light in summer. In the birthday cakes. In the Christmas biscuits." I stopped. "When you move things and change things and reorganize things, you are not just rearranging a kitchen. You are rearranging my language, the way I speak to my family, the way I have always shown them that I love them." The kitchen was very quiet. Nina said, after a long moment. "I didn't know that," I said. "I know you didn't," she said. "I'm so sorry, Dorothy." I looked at this young woman at my kitchen table. 39 years old. Capable and hardworking and well-meaning, and beneath all of that, something I had not quite seen before. Someone who had learned to run things because running things was what she knew how to do, and who had not yet learned that some things should not be run, only received. Huh? I said. I believe you, she said. What do I do now? I said. You could start by putting my biscuit tin back on the counter. She looked at me. Then she got up from the table. She went to the high shelf above the fridge. She reached up. She is taller than me and did not need a chair. And she brought down the round tin with the Scottish Highlands on the lid. She set it on the counter. In its place. I said, and my herb basket. Bottom shelf of the spice cupboard. She found it. She set it on the counter beside the tin. I said, bed up. She stood looking at the counter. Then she turned and she said, will you teach me? The cake. The recipe. Will you show me while you make it? I looked at her. She said, not to take it over. Not to do it better. Just so. To know it. So I know what I've been missing. I thought about my mother. About the way knowledge passes between women who love the same family. Not formally, not as a lesson, but in the ordinary intimacy of a shared kitchen, standing beside each other while something rises in the oven and the hours pass and the house fills with a smell that the family knows means something good is coming. I said, wash your hands. Then, and come here. We made the cake together. I showed her the recipe. Not written down, because it has never been written down, because some things live in the hands rather than on paper. I showed her how much flour by the feel of it in the bowl, how much butter by the way it softens when you work it, how you know the bat is right not by a measurement, but by the way it falls from the spoon. Slowly, heavily, just so. Nina watched, and then she did. Her hands were more precise than mine. She had a scientist's approach, measuring carefully, checking. I let her measure. There are many ways to make the same thing. She asks questions. Good questions. Attentive questions. The kind that told me she was genuinely learning and not just going through motions. She asked why vanilla rather than almond. She asked about the temperature of the butter and why it mattered. She asked how I knew when it was done. Not the timer, but the signs. The ones you learn only by making a thing many times in many kitchens over many years. I answered everything. While we waited for the first layers to bake, we sat at the kitchen table together. With tea. Proper tea. Made with my tea bags from the front of the cupboard, which Nina had quietly moved back while I was not looking. We sat, and the kitchen smelled the way it used to smell, and I cannot easily describe to you what that did for something inside me. But I will say this. It was something like breathing again after holding your breath for a very long time. We talked. Not about the difficult things. Those had been said and they were done. We talked about Cora. About Sam, who was 6 and who had recently decided that he wanted to be a train driver and discussed this ambition at every available opportunity. About Robert, who was much more like George than either of us usually said out loud. about what Lena was doing up north and how the children they were getting on. Cora appeared in the doorway at 8:30 in her school uniform, drawn downstairs by the smell the way children always are. The way Robert and Lena had been drawn downstairs by the same smell for their entire childhoods. She stood in the doorway and she looked at the two of us, and then she looked at the cooling rack where the first sponge layers were already sitting. She said, "Is that my cake?" I said. "It is your cake," she said, in the particular tone of a child receiving good news they had hoped for but not entirely counted on. "Good." Nina laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her. Cora said, "Can I have the bowl?" Nina looked at me. I looked at Cora. I said, "After school." She considered this. She said, "Okay," and she went to have her breakfast. Nina looked after her. She said, "She's like you," I said. "She is," Nina said. "I mean that as a compliment," I said. "I know you do." When the cake was finished, both layers baked and cooled, the buttercream made and applied, the top decorated with a particular pattern I had always used, the one that Cora had asked for specifically. Nina stood back and looked at it. She looked at it the way you look at something that has taught you something. She said, "It looks like a birthday," I said. "That is what it is supposed to look like." Robert came in from work that evening and stopped in the kitchen doorway. He stopped the way he always stopped in that doorway as a boy, arrested by whatever smell met him. He looked at the cake on the counter. He looked at me and Nina, both of us at the table with our tea. He said, Is that Mom's birthday cake?" I said. "It is Cora's birthday cake," he said. "It smells like a birthday," Nina said, very quietly. "That's what I said." He looked between us. He read the room, the way he had always been able to read rooms. He said, "Is everything all right?" I said. "Sit down, Robert. I'll put the kettle on." He sat down. I went to the counter. I filled the kettle. I set it to boil in its proper place, the right side of the counter, the place it had always been, back where it belonged. And I listened to the ordinary sounds of my kitchen. The hiss of the water, the click of the kettle, the voices of my son and his wife at my table behind me. And I thought, there it is. There it is. Cora's birthday was on a Saturday. We had a small party. Family. A few of Cora's school friends. Miriam, who came because she always came to birthdays and whose chocolate biscuits were the most anticipated contribution of any gathering. The kitchen was busy all morning in a way I had not felt to be busy for almost a year. Noise and movement and the particular productive chaos of a celebration being prepared. I cooked. Properly. Fully. In my kitchen. Sandwiches and sausage rolls and the small cheese pastries that had been our party's staple for 30 years. Nina made the salads and the healthier options, the ones that the adults were glad of alongside everything else. We worked alongside each other, and the kitchen held both of us without anyone having to shrink. Sam declared at 11 o'clock in the morning that he was already hungry, and was told it was not yet time, and looked at the food on the counter with the expression of a 6-year-old experiencing profound injustice. Nina gave him a small cheese pastry while my back was turned, which I pretended not to see. Nina called from up north. She spoke to me for half an hour, the way she always did when something significant had happened that I had not yet fully reported. I had told her some of it. The kitchen, Nina, the conversation, and she had said, in her direct and characteristic way, "Good. I'm glad it's being sorted." I was about to come down and sort it myself. I told her I had managed. She said, "I know you did. You always do." She also said, "Tell me about the cake." I told her about the cake. She said, "Save me a piece." I said there would not be any left. She said, "Save me a piece or I will tell Robert the story about the Christmas he was 12. I said I would save her a piece. The afternoon was warm and full in the way of a good birthday party. Cora received her presents with the serious gratitude she brings to everything. Each one examined properly, thanked for specifically, set aside with care. Sound ate more than was advisable and showed no signs of slowing. Robert sat with Miriam in the garden and they talked about George, which I had not expected, but which made my heart feel something it had needed to feel. The simple recognition that George was still part of things, still mentioned, still present in the family's conversation. And then the cake. I carried it in. The room was loud and then it went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something important is being presented. The candles were lit. 9 of them, 1 for each year, and 1 more for luck, the way my mother had always insisted upon. 10 candles on a child's 9th birthday, because the luck one matters. We sang. The full, slightly out-of-tune family version of Happy Birthday that sounds nothing like how it sounds on recordings, but which is the only version that counts because it is ours. Cara looked at the cake. She looked at it the way she looks at things she has been waiting for, with complete attention, with that particular stillness that is hers alone. Then she looked at me. She said, "Grandma Dot, it smells exactly right." I said, "Of course it does." She blew out all 10 candles in one breath, which she announced with great satisfaction. The room applauded. I looked across the table at Nina. She was watching Cora. Her expression was something I cannot perfectly name. Heart happiness. Heart something more inward. Something like learning, or recognizing. She looked up and caught my eye. I gave her a small nod. She gave one back. When the party was over and the children were in bed and Robert was clearing the last things in the garden, Nina found me in the kitchen. I was putting the good dishes away, the ones I'd only brought out for celebrations. She picked up a dish towel and she stood beside me and she helped. We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then she said, "Next month is Sam's birthday." I said, "I know," she said. "Do you think you could show me how to make the cake properly, so I can do it on my own for next time, or whenever you want someone else to be able to make it?" Oh. I looked at her. I thought about my mother again, about what it means to pass something forward, not to hand it over and step back, but to give it to the next hands without letting go of it yourself, to share a language rather than surrender it. I said, "We'll make it together for Sam's birthday, and the one after that. And after a few times, you'll know it well enough to make it without me," she said, "and you'll still make it sometimes. Your own." I said, "I will always make it sometimes." "It is my cake," she said. "It is your cake." We finished putting the dishes away. The kitchen was quiet and clean and smelled of birthday. A smell that is specifically cake and candles and the warmth of a room that has held people who love each other. My kitchen. Our kitchen. I dried my hands on the towel and I looked around at it one more time before I went upstairs to bed. The kettle on the right side of the counter. The herb basket. The biscuit tin with the Scottish Highlands on the lid. My big ceramic mixing bowl in its place on the lower shelf. Everything where it belongs. It is 7 months since Cora's birthday. I walk into my kitchen every morning now. Really. The way I always did. For 45 years. Before the hesitation set in. I come downstairs in my dressing gown and my slippers and I push open the kitchen door and I go inside and I begin. The kettle is on the right side of the counter. The herb basket is between the kettle and the toaster. The biscuit tin is where it lives, where it has always lived, where it will stay as long as I have anything to say about it. Which, I have decided, is for as long as I am in this house. Which is, I have further decided, for as long as I choose to be. Nina and I have found our way into a rhythm that I did not think we would find when things were at their worst. She still manages the household efficiently. That is her nature, and I would not want to change it. She still buys the seeded bread, which I have gradually accepted as not being as terrible as I first thought, though I maintain that it is still not bread in any meaningful sense. She still tracks the children's nutrition with the seriousness of a scientist, which is something Cora finds faintly embarrassing now that she is old enough to notice. But she comes to the kitchen on Sunday mornings and she stands beside me and she learns. She has made the birthday cake twice now. Once for Sam, with me beside her, and once for one of the children's friends, on her own, with only one phone call to me to ask about the vanilla. It came out right. She sent me a photograph and it looked exactly as it should look. I told her so. She is learning the language. She is not yet fluent, but she is learning. The thing I want to say to you, the thing I have thought about most, in the months since all of this happened, is something about the way we carry who we are. We carry it in our habits. In the particular way we make tea, in the particular brand we choose, and the cup we always reach for first. In the route we take through our own house in the morning. The rooms we pass through. The window we look out of. The sounds we make that the house has learned to expect. In the recipes we have made so many times they live in our hands rather than our heads. In the smells we have put into a kitchen over years and decades. The accumulated warmth of 10,000 meals, absorbed into the walls, into the air, into the very fabric of the place. When someone disrupts those habits, even without meaning harm, even in the name of improvement, they disrupt the way we carry ourselves. They move the foundation slightly, and you do not always notice, at first, that the foundation has moved. You just find yourself standing at a doorway, hesitating, not knowing quite why. I know now that the answer to that hesitation is not to retreat. Not to go upstairs and make tea in a bedroom kettle and pretend that the kitchen does not belong to you anymore. The answer is to go in. To walk through the door the way you have always walked through it. To stand in the middle of your own space and remind it. And remind yourself that you are still here. I know, true, that the people who disrupt us are not always trying to. Nina was not trying to erase me. She was trying to build something. She simply did not know, until I told her, what she was building on top of. And once she knew, she had enough in her. Enough honesty. Enough love for my son and my grandchildren. Enough willingness to hear a difficult thing. To change course. That willingness, when you find it in someone, is worth meeting. Worth opening a door toward. George would have liked how things are now, I think. He would have come into the kitchen on a Sunday morning and he would have found Nina and me there together. Flour on the counter, something in the oven, the kitchen doing what it has always done best. And he would have stood in the doorway and he would have taken a breath and he would have said, in his particular way, "Smells good." Yes, George. It does. I made Sam's birthday cake last weekend. He sat on the counter beside me the whole time, which Nina would normally have discouraged on safety grounds, but which she permitted on this occasion with only one mention of hygiene. Sam is 6 and fully convinced that if he watches closely enough he will learn the secret of the cake. He watched very closely. He will be back next time, watching again. That is fine. That is more than fine. That is exactly how it should work. The small ones watching the older ones, and the knowledge passing forward through the watching. My mother passed it to me. I am passing it to Nina. And perhaps one day, when Cora is old enough and stands beside me at this counter by her own choice, I will pass it to her as well. The recipe that has never been written down because it lives in the hands. The cake that tastes like birthdays because it has been made for every birthday in this family for 30 years. Some things are too large to fit on paper. They have to be carried differently. In memory, in muscle, in the smell of a kitchen that has been loved for a long time. On Tuesday morning, an ordinary Tuesday, gray and quiet, like the Tuesday that began all of this. I came downstairs in my dressing gown. I walked to the kitchen. I put my hand on the door frame. And I walked straight through. No hesitation. The kettle went on. The tea went in the cup. The morning light came through the window above the sink and fell on account of the way it has fallen on that counter every morning for 45 years. My kitchen. My morning. My life. Still here. Still mine. Still beginning.